Morning and welcome to the 14th letter of the Copperplate Majuscules series. This is for an N. I have explained this before, but I'm using a Nico G nib in a speedball holder, which is an oblique holder. I've started with my backwards universal line of beauty. I need to make sure that the top is parallel to the guidelines. Don't know if you can see them right there. And the bottom is parallel but pointing the other way. Then from an N, I need to do a full pressure downstroke straight down the slant line. And then from that point, I'm going to repeat my my backwards line of universal beauty. All right. So an N's pretty straightforward, especially compared to an M, which we've done super recently. It's a much simpler sort of layout. Let me just clean off my nib and we'll do a little bit of analysis. It is important to clean off your nib, particularly if you've got acrylic ink, because it will harden to a plastic. And that can get between the tines of your nib and it can ruin a lot of nibs and eat through the coating quite quickly, so make sure you do clean it quite thoroughly. To clean it, I just use a cotton bud that either I just put in a little bit of water or I lick, and then I roll it on the inside of here. I apply gentle pressure on the underside just to split my tines enough that I can make sure that there's nothing in between them. So you can see the tines are slightly splitting there. I'm getting tiny little dots on here, but nothing more than that. And I'll also do the same on the top. I tend to keep a stash of them to the side. So right, let's get going with this. Let me just make sure it's focusing in the right area. There we go. So obviously with a N, you have two lines of universal beauty that are backwards. So that's a universal line of beauty, and that is a universal line of beauty. And in the middle, we have a full pressure downstroke. We have two potential areas for flourishing. What you need to be careful with is that your universal line of beauty doesn't go off your slant line. Obviously, you're doing it backwards, and the middle third, so my middle third is about here. So in between these points, the lines should all be parallel. Oh, I can't even fit that on there. If I go, so put that there. These heights will put. Should be parallel. Okay. You need to make sure that obviously this is parallel, so it is along the slant line. My slant line's right here. And then that last third, it spends correcting itself from being parallel to the slant line to being parallel to the guidelines going horizontally. What is the temptation with an N is for that last, I think I've still got loads of room over here, I do, is for that last line of universal beauty to be very extra is the word I want to use, where it's going above and beyond, and it's, I mean, I'm way off the slant line here, but It's because I'm trying to do it backwards. And that's absolutely fine as a flourishable area. But it needs to make sure that you're not attempting the flourish until you have completed, excuse me, until you have completed your middle section, which must be along the slant line. So if I write right here, have I got some room? I've got a little bit of room. So do not attempt the flourish and I say a middle third, but that it doesn't have to be a middle third. If yours is more like a half, I've seen a lot of people that follow Eleanor Winter's resources, for example, and her lines of Universal Beauty have a much longer middle section, which is absolutely fine. So although I'm writing a third, if yours is more like a half, or if it's more like a quarter, then fine. You know, the difficulty with Copperplate is that the rules are very much guidelines. And it's about understanding what the patterns are, so you can understand how to break the rules. So we can't do that flourish until that middle third is complete. Otherwise, you're risking running it wide, and then that's going to lean into your letters further on. You should just have basically an extended universal line of beauty here. If I move that down, I can actually put it right here. Okay. I have seen them similar to an M, where the flourish comes back over and bisects the letter. That's because this downstroke is uninterrupted. It gives you 15 millimeters basically to play with of height. So if you do want to bisect it, and if it's appropriate for your balance, then that's absolutely a possibility. I tend not to like doing it, purely because I just prefer a simpler letter. But you know, if you have a very fanciful piece to do, then I understand that, you know, it happens. We've also got a flourishing area at the bottom. So if I grab another one of these, hold on. I've woken up this morning and my voice is not doing so good. I think I'm definitely coming down with something, but who comes down with a cold in July? It's one of those weird things, isn't it? All right. So if we're going again, so my backwards line of Universal Beauty is right here. Actually, I don't like that at all. I'm going to do that again. Much better. Okay. So my backwards line of Universal Beauty is right here. And I'm going to do my full pressure downstroke along the slant line as much as I can. So basically I've got an A here that I could complete and do, but an N just gives you that extra bit. You have roughly the same rules as an M, where you're trying, let me just clean this off. There we go. Where you're trying to replicate, this still isn't dry, but you're trying to replicate the amount of negative space that is contained underneath as is contained above. I'll shade that in a second when this is dry, but I'll make a note of it right here. So I could say amount of negative space above and below. is equal. We're almost there. I think it's almost dry. So I've got this space right here that is contained should be about the same amount of space as this negative space here. So you should be able to see that if we cover, use some post-it notes, that's exciting, because then they'll stay where I put them. I do recommend doing this, particularly if you're doing longer pieces of work as well. But what you can do, and what I've seen a lot of calligraphers do, is they cover parts of their words or their letters, so that they're just looking at certain bits. So if I just look at the middle third here, I can see that these 3 lines should be equidistant. Yeah. So if I put that right here, I could fit it on here. So middle. I cannot fit equidistant in there. It's far too fancy of a word. Equidistant. And we can just block off the top and bottom of the letter so that we can check that. You can see I'm about there. Yeah, I think eyeballing it, I don't think I've done such a bad job. And it should obviously go thin, thick, thin. You should never have 2 thick lines next to each other. I have seen people that do a strange A or a strange M, where they do a normal universal line of beauty and then the rest of it, and that puts 2 thick lines next to each other, and it's just drawing too much attention. You must have a alternating pattern of thick and thin. You can put multiple thin lines next to each other, especially if you're flourishing, so then that's gonna not draw as much attention, but it's gonna give you those shapes to play with. So if I came up from the, I mean, maybe this is a way forward. Maybe I could just, I don't know, shove a thing in here, and then we could just continue the line on. Yeah, maybe I could show you flourishing that way. That would be kind of cool. So we could continue on a flourish like this, where my first oval is pointing along the slant line, and my second oval is pointing horizontally. That is roughly horizontally. There we go. So it is pointing horizontally, and there is a bisection as well. So that's sort of knocking loads of elements on the head. I've seen this flourish done a lot, but this is why it works effectively. You should also have a decent amount of space here, with the thin line that's here. I've tried again to give me the right amount of space here so that my lines should be equidistant apart, even to my flourish. Yeah, so it doesn't look like your flourish is too close to your letter, and it doesn't look like it's too far away. So this should also be about the width of your O. So if I'm looking at that, then that means that, I mean, no is a great word to start with, isn't it? There we go. So if I'm doing an O or a T or whatever, there we go. There we go. So I should have in that word, I wonder if I've got just a black. Oh, no, there we go. Yeah, I do. So I've got a O in here. And bearing in mind that this is going to be at the widest bit, so I should be doing this at the middle third, really. So there's my O. There's another O. It's the same gap. That should be containing the same size of letter. And again here, I should be able to fit an I. And all these O's should be roughly the same. You can lay over tracing paper or post-it notes, as I've done, just to see if your O's are consistent. And that should dictate where your word should come from. Okay, so if I move that to right here so that I'm not getting rid of it per se, but I can still show you some stuff on here. Okay, you can put terminus dots on either side. I've chosen a word that has an ascender. So it has a T right here. It's not a full ascender, so it doesn't go right up like an L or a B would, or an H or a K, I suppose. But it's giving me enough that it's sort of invading this large amount of space that I could use for flourishing my N. So I know that I'm not really going to touch this space very much. If I had just the word no, then I could flourish that and fill in that space as needed. I could continue it on and make it cross the crossbar of my T. However, I tend to stay away from those. Purely because to cross over the crossbar, you can see that it's actually really high up. Really high up? Sorry, no, that's the opposite of what I wanted to say. It's really low down compared to the height of my X height right here. And I'm saying that we should be keeping an equal amount of distance away in order to give your letters and your words that breathable space. We should be keeping an O away at all times. That is not an O in here. So what I could do is I could extend this up and then I could bring that round just so that it's not going anywhere near that. I tend to find it harder to read as well as a crossbar. So you can see also here, I know it's all sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy here, but the space here is bisected by this line, so I've got a contained small overly circle business going on, but you can see it's roughly bisected by that line, and it crosses at as close to 90 degrees as we can get, even though we're limited by the angle of the sun line. Yeah. So that's as close as we're going to get to 90 degrees. So you can see I've tried to do that here. But I tend to find that this is harder to read. So I don't tend to do these. But I am all for just continuing it on a little bit and giving it a little bit of a flourish. So if I did it on this side, have I got my black one so it looks a bit more together? There we go. So I could just continue that and put my terminus dot later, not a problem. Your legibility here, just to talk about your legibility boxes, are the same as in your M, where you've got a high peak and a low peak, and those are going to be your legibility things. You cannot cross into that area, so you can sneak between them, as I said before. So you can loop this background and cut across that middle third, which will cut at 90 degrees for you. Well, our version of 90 degrees. And that's totally possible, but you cannot cross at the peaks because you don't really have an area to bisect here. There's no clean space to bisect. Your bisection would have to happen at 1.5 times the X height, as my capitals are 3 times my X height, so it's a 2:1:2 ratio that I use. I did have a question from someone about ratios, which was actually a really good question, because it's one of those things where it is choice. So I use the ratio 2:1 and my descenders would drop down another 2. I know other calligraphers do prefer to use, so here's my 1 in between here. I do know some calligraphers prefer to use a 3:2:3 or a 1.5. A 1.5 to 1 to 1.5, which is absolutely fine. It's totally personal preference. I tend to like larger letters purely because it gives me more room to flourish and have fun. But maybe your script, it works better with a 1.5 to 1. I did use this ratio for a long time, so I'm not surprised if you're transferring between the two, or if you just want to try one out and you hate it, so you go back to the other one. Not a problem. Have a look at people's work online. There's some great people on Instagram that regularly upload stuff where they're exploring with different X heights. It can also be dictated by the type of work that you're doing. So if you're doing a large piece of prose, for example, your X-height will want to be smaller so that you can fit more in. Or if you're doing envelope addressing, you may want to switch it up during the middle of the envelope. So you may want 2 on 2 for the name so that the name seems more prominent, and then the address can be in a 1.5 to 1. Not a problem. Copperplate is one of those scripts that has a lot of variation, and the variations are what make the hand of the calligrapher, which is also, it sounds like a great positive, but there's also a negative to that, in that because it doesn't have such rigid rules, it's taken it longer to be recognized as a script that carries as much weight as, say, broad edge scripts. It's getting there now. But it has come a long way. All right, so I think that is about it for an N. Please let me know of any issues or any questions you've got. It really does make me quite happy to see that people are, you know, using these videos to help them. That's entirely the point of me making them. So yeah, please let me know. Have a good day. Bye bye.